amazing Savvy Ladies team. Welcome, welcome. It's great to have you all here. And thank you not only to Lisa, but to our speakers, as well as Judy Herbst, who is our amazing Executive Director of Savvy Ladies, and Tracy Wheeler, who is our helpline coordinator, doing everything to make the helpline as successful as it is.
Well, Stacy, thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Thank you for those amazing introductions. I'm Judy Herbst, the Executive Director of Savvy Ladies, and we are so glad that you are here with us tonight. I want you all to know that if your questions aren't answered this evening, or if you have questions that are follow-up from tonight, hopefully you all are aware of the Savvy Ladies free financial helpline, where you can submit your question at any time and get connected with a pro bono professional volunteer in the financial world. As we've said, you have Jamie as a volunteer tonight, and I think I've even recruited now Jay to join us as a volunteer on the helpline. So you really get expertise on the helpline, and we're thrilled you're here. So please use this resource. It's a free resource. Want to share with you that tonight we're really pleased to bring you this program this evening, and it could not be done without the sponsorship and financial contribution and support that we get from many of our supporters, and Jay Moto is that supporter for tonight, as along with the Miller Zeinerman. So thank you both very much. Thank you, Jay, for sponsoring the series, Lisa Zeiderman for sponsoring and being a moderator tonight as well. And we're very excited to hear from both of you and hear what you have to say. So we appreciate that support. As you all know, Stacy introduced herself. She is our rock star founder of Savvy Ladies. We are now in our 21st year that she established Savvy Ladies 21 years ago, and we are rocking it today, now connecting over 2,400 women last year, and we are going to surpass 3,000 this year. It's really exciting with all the programs that we are putting together, and that we can help you as women. That was the mission and goal, is to empower women to ask the financial questions in a safe place, not be scared, but get practical, authentic, real answers. And that's what we are really proud to be giving you. It is really my delight. I know Stacy introduced Lisa, but Lisa, as our moderator tonight, is also our board chair. She is a rock solid supporter of Savvy Ladies, and she knows her finances as well as she knows divorce. She is a person who knows money, her money, inside and out, which is really, really important, because you need to be transparent, and she will share that with you, and her passion of why she does what she does, and teaches and educates, because she wants other women to be empowered to know their net worth and how to build their own net worth. With that, I'd like to introduce Jamie officially. Lima, he is a CDFA, a CFP, but also he is a volunteer on our helpline, which is really, really important. And in chatting with him and chatting with our volunteers, we do have male volunteers on the helpline. As we know, in the profession, there are many male CFPs. Why does someone want to be a male CDFA and work with women? They are empathetic, they are passionate, and Jamie really wants to and is an advocate for the women he works with and he supports through divorce. So when you come to the helpline, you will get male and female volunteers, and know that the male volunteers on our helpline are there because they want to give back, they want to help, and they have their own personal story to share, which I think is really important. Jamie will share that as we move into tonight, but he really is a good listener, which I think is so important, a great value to have for our volunteers. Dawn has been such a wonderful supporter of Savvy Ladies, because she is a client, and she was a client who used the system, went through divorce. She is sharing her story. So it's so wonderful and gracious of Dawn. Thank you for being on the panel tonight to share your story. It's always good to hear stories from fellow women going through this journey, that it happens. There's a line at the end of the tunnel, and you succeed and you smile and you are beautiful. With that, Lisa, I'm going to let you now introduce Jay and Sarah. So I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Judy, and thank you, Stacy. You are both incredible, and thank you, Jamie, and Dawn, obviously, and Jay and Sarah. So Jay Moda came into my life, I guess about 2 years ago, Jay, and Jay is a certified financial planner, and he is a rock star in terms of in terms of helping our clients figure out their assets, and also helping our clients divide their retirement accounts. And we're going to talk a lot about that because Jay has those magical ways that he does it through that item called a quadro, which is a very interesting document that allows you to divide your retirement accounts tax-free so that you are not paying taxes when one retirement account is turned over to another retirement account. So we're going to talk about that. Jay also helps people figure out what their lifestyle analysis is, and figure out their expenses and how to actually get to settlement. And he has worked with several of our clients to get them to settlement of their issues, matrimonial issues. So we thank you, Jay, for being here. And Sarah is my beloved paralegal manager. She is amazing. Some of you who are on here may have worked with her. She knows how to work that net worth statement and get it done and make sure that all of the items are there so that when you're sitting in either court or a deposition or a settlement negotiation, the net worth statement is actually accurate. And Dawn can tell you how important that net worth statement being accurate is. So actually, Dawn, I'm going to actually ask you about the net worth statement. What is the net worth statement? You've lived through it, and how did you make it through the net worth statement, which I know was quite painful at times?
Yeah, well, hi, I'm Dawn. Great to be here, everybody. Just full disclosure, because it's going to come out eventually, because I know I'll blurt it out. Lisa was my divorce lawyer. So yes, she knows firsthand what I went through when she first told me that I had to fill out a net worth statement. And I just want to show you, I went and found, I did this before,
Wow.
but I went and found the notes that I took to put together my net worth statement, including this one piece of paper where I first wrote down on every line, every expenditure for the first time in my entire life at 48, was I?
Something like that.
I had no idea. Basically, you have to write down what all your assets are. I had none, and all your liabilities. And I did not know that, A, how much money I spent on anything, and B, that all the asset lines would be blank because all the assets were in my husband's name. Because when I married him, he had a lot of money and he had a lot of properties and he had a big job. And I had a child and quit my job. And so I had a puny little retirement account and that was it. And so it was really stunning to see that my monthly expenses were something like $25,000 a month. And my retirement account was $27,000. And that was it for me. So what, it would take care of 1 month's worth of expenses. And I remember thinking, like, for the first time in my life, I'd been married for, 15 years. I had enough money to actually pay my bills. I wasn't somebody whose husband took care of everything. I actually did pay the bills, but I didn't pay attention to how much anything cost because for the first time I was actually able to pay them. And it was such a thrill to pay them that I never thought about how much anything cost. And so I remember filling out the line for like a drugstore and like beauty items. And I remember Lisa going, "What is this? What are these? What are these drugstore and beauty items?" I said, "Vitamins?" She goes, "You use $600 worth of vitamins a month?" And I remember thinking that my life was going to have to change. Like, I just knew that was the moment. And the thing is that once I wrote this down, you guys, I'm going to pass this over in a second because you guys are going to talk about like a lifestyle analysis. And this was the number that was real, but it was also the number that I realized I was going to have to come back down to earth from. And that's why it was so useful to me, because I ended up living, of course, on a fraction of this, but it was important to know where I was and to know where I could start whittling away. But there was a lot that went on in between there, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
There was a lot that went on in between. That would be true. And, Dawn, I'm going to say, since you were frank, divorce takes a while. Would you agree? Because I think that's, for many of the women who are here tonight and gentlemen, I think that it's so frustrating that it takes so long for people and that it's a process and that they're not done, in a year or in a year and a half or 2 years. And particularly now with COVID, but even when you were going through it, it took a long time. And you went through, I think, several judges, as I recall, too.
4 years. Yeah. And, in a way, that was useful because, it's a real process of evolution. It takes so long between, you file a motion, you wait a few months, you do something, you wait a few more. It's not like a constant effort, but it does end up taking a really long time. Yeah.
And that was 4 years before we were in COVID, where the courts was so broken. So, Jay, so you have been very, very helpful to many of our clients, and some have come actually from you to us. And can you tell us why the net worth statement is so important?
Well, when we're looking at, we compare both net worth statements of net worth. And so we're looking for accuracy, number one, to track down all the assets so that we can, one, look and see what the total marital estate is worth. But also it establishes what the expenses are and what the lifestyle may be. So if you have a self-employed individual that may not report all of their income on their taxes, income for taxes and income for support in a divorce are two totally different things. So one way to establish that is through the lifestyle expenses to kind of determine how much is being spent to support the lifestyle. So that's one area that we look at in the statement of net worth. The assets is another important thing because when clients submit their statements and all their financial documents, we look to confirm that we have everything that was been listed on the statement of net worth and vice versa. So we compare the two and see if anything is missing. But those are the two big reasons. But the accuracy on the statement of net worth, if your case does end up in litigation, chances are you're going to be questioned about everything on there. So generalizing an expense is not the best idea. And when I do statement of net worths, I call them deposition ready. I'd rather be the one to give you a hard time, to get all the information, determine exactly what the expenses are, as opposed to the opposing attorney questioning you for hours in a room about everything on your statement of net worth. So accuracy is important for multiple reasons.
And I will say, just as a helpful hint to people, Jay is talking about depositions, which is a place where you, a time when you actually are asked under oath about certain issues during your divorce, including your net worth statement, where you were grilled basically line by line about your net worth statement. And it is helpful to, as you're going through it, to understand where you got your numbers from. So did you get your numbers, for example, from the year 2022? What did you utilize to get that net worth statement? Whether it be credit cards or bank statements or, whatever it was that you utilized, you need to make sure that you think about it. And Sarah, you can talk to the issue of how you collect all that data from our clients and put this together. So if you would.
Definitely. So it is definitely a grueling process and it is not a quick process. So just keep that in mind. But what we like to do is pretty much get statements for the past year for any accounts that pay expenses, bank accounts, credit cards, the year-end statement, the year-end like a credit card statement can be very helpful. And we try to go to the past 12 months, not just the past year. So if it's, if we're in January now, we can use 2023. But when if we're in like October, then we wouldn't be using 2023. We would be using the last 12 months. However, it makes sense in your case at your time. But it's really important, like Lisa said, to be as specific as possible in terms of where you're getting the information from. A lot of times on the statement of net worth itself, we will note the time period that the expense is for. we'll note how the expense was calculated, something like, summer camp, where did that number come from? And we'll like list the actual summer camps and what the cost was, because like Jay mentioned as well, that when you're in a deposition or when you're in trial and the attorney is asking you, how did you calculate this number? It's always a great feeling to be able to say, well, this is how I calculate, and you know exactly where you got the number from, and it wasn't you guessing or estimating or thinking this is what I would like it to be. You really want to be as specific as you can, and it will require many drafts back and forth, because what we do is when we get the statements, we get a first draft, then we kind of go through everything, we plug in the numbers in our program, and we come up with a list of questions of, where did you get this number? How did you calculate that? What, this asset that you have, whose name is it in? When did you open the account? I also recommend getting credit reports so that you know exactly what's in your name, what's not in your name. And if there's a nasty surprise waiting for you, you won't find out, down the line. You kind of get to it right from the beginning.
That's great, Sarah, and I thank you. So Jamie, I'm assuming that our Savvy Ladies clients also come to you about their net worth statement. And someone here asked about whether when you go through a divorce, are the net worth statements combined in some way? And maybe you could speak to that particular issue.
Sure. Yeah. I just like Jay, I mean, we want to try to get as much information from both parties as possible. In my experience in doing this, usually there's one party that is not as forthright with the information, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room can concur with who that would be. But there tends to be a lot of times when we have a lot of information from one party, not a lot of information from the other, and then that, going back to Sarah's point, which is, let's just compile all this information, let's organize it in a nice, neat, simplified fashion, basically taking the stack of papers that Dawn had that she showed everybody earlier and trying to compile that into a nice, neat, organized, maybe 1 or 2 page document that we can all read and understand. And then that helps us formulate the questions when we go through what's called a get organized meeting after we start to compile all that information from our clients. And in that meeting, it's about an hour-long conversation of just like Sarah said, who owns what? Do we have everything titled correctly? Do we what information are we missing from you or from the other party? Just so we can figure out, what holes or what gaps there are in the information and start to fill them along the way. But it is an ongoing, ever evolving process. I tell my clients and anybody that works with us, like, if we can get to 70% accuracy at this stage, we're knocking it out of the park, because we're going to find more information as we go. And as the case goes on down this path, we're going to find much more information as we go, and we'll just fill it in as we do, as we find the info. But yeah, I actually have a sample net worth sheet which is just a 1-pager that I show our clients. If it'd be helpful for people to see what this looks like and visualize it, I can certainly share it.
Sure. Although I will say in New York, we do not have that simple net worth statement. They are uniform in terms of court, and they are many, many pages. As I think the other Sarah, Dawn, and Jay know, they are usually like 30 pages before you get to the end of this this project, because you have all the expenses listed and they're categorized. And then we go to income, which we're going to talk about in a second, and then assets, and then liabilities. And then the last page, which is how much, have you spent on attorney fees, et cetera. So it is a very detailed document, unless people are going to family court, and family court is not able to give you a divorce. So it is a very detailed document, and it is overwhelming to many people because of that. So so that's kind of where we are in terms of that. So Jay, what I come to you a lot for is something called a quadro. Can you explain what a quadro is?
I can, but if you would allow me just 1 second about the statement of net worth.
Sure.
One thing that I forgot is the dates of accounts, right? Is that one thing is the dates. So when you're thinking about what's marital, what's not marital, understanding when accounts were open is very important. So if you had an account that was open prior to marriage, we want to know that, especially on the statement of net worth, because then that may be considered separate property of yours, and that gives us the information that we need to know. The other thing I'll say about a statement of net worth, it is individual to each party, but I always tell my clients, if you know of an account that's not yours, don't exclude that information. Tell me about that information, because that may be an account that the other party may not disclose. So if we know about it, then we know to look for it. So even though you're doing your information, you should let all accounts, everything you know should be disclosed. So now on to the question, and thank you, Lisa.
So actually, I'm going to comment on that, Jay, because it's really important what you just said. So marital versus separate property, what is the difference between the two? Let's just unpack that for a second, because you brought it up and it's really important.
Well, so marital and separate property, consider the day that you got married and the day that you filed for divorce as bookmarks, right? And the day that you filed for divorce, the day you go to court, depending on where you are, if you're going through a mediation, it could be an agreed upon date, but at some point, the valuation has to stop. But when you get married, any assets that you had in your name, the most notable ones are like retirement accounts. So if you had a 401k or an IRA, and that was, before you got married, when you get married, then you have that amount of money is considered premarital. And so if you've been married for a long time, the key about separate properties, you have to be able to prove it. So you have to be able to establish what the value was as of the date of marriage. And most custodians, most banks don't keep information that long, so it can be challenging. But establishing in that value is one key component. The second component to separate property is proving that it remains separate and that you never commingled that money into the marriage. And so if you had a bank account with, say, $50,000 in it, and it was in an individual account and you got married, and now you have that bank account while you're married, but you start making contributions to the marriage, or you start adding income into that account, it can get harder to establish that separate property. But separate property is property that belonged to you outside of the marriage, provided that it was maintained separate and we can establish that it is separate. And separate property can be after the marriage. So if you file for divorce and that's the date of commencement realized in your state, then any assets after that accrued is separate property and yours. So it can be a very gray matter. It's not definitive, but that's generally how I view separate property.
Okay, so now skip over to retirement accounts. What kind of
Sure.
retirement accounts are there, first of all?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, you have the ones that employer sponsored. So you have your 401ks, your 403bs, your 457s, your tax deferred annuities, you have the tax sheltered plans. Those are all what we call defined contributions. Those are the typical ones that you're making contributions to, and then your employer matches you. And the second type, which is not so common, are pensions or defined benefit plans, which you generally don't make contributions to unless you're with the state or the government where you can buy into it. But essentially, it's a pension for the rest of your life. Most state and government employees offer that. Private employers generally don't offer pensions unless they're really big. But those are the two big ones, because that's where most people hold the majority of their assets outside of their home. The other type of retirement accounts are your individually owned accounts. So your IRAs, your traditional IRAs, and even though simple IRAs and SEP IRAs are provided to you through an employer, they're still considered an individual account. And those are for the most part, those are the different types of retirement accounts that are out there.
Now, certain accounts, when someone is finished with their divorce, certain accounts can be just rolled over from one spouse to the other spouse, such as IRAs,
Yes.
correct? Without any tax issues and with no quadro.
Correct.
But certain accounts need an extra document actually to go through the court, which is the Qualified Domestic Relations Order, which is the quadro. And why do we need that, Jay?
So it used to be that spouses, it used to be where retirement accounts were protected and spouses had no access to someone's retirement account in a divorce, and that changed. So the domestic relations order is a separate court order that basically tells the plan that's sponsoring it. So like Fidelity, for an example, is a big one. TIA is another big one. It basically tells them what has been established in the divorce as far as the separation is concerned. So any employer-sponsored plan, whether it be a plan that's being contributed to, like a 401k, or a non-contributory plan like a pension, is going to require a qualified domestic relations order or domestic relations order in order to divide that plan, because of the protections put in place for the employee. And they have to make sure that it's done. The key thing about these things is that the plans make all the rules. So you can agree, you can have in your agreement the wildest thing that you want. If the plan will not accept that agreement, they're not going to execute it. So it's very important that you understand what the plan will and will not allow, because there's a lot of benefits out there, especially when you're talking about pensions with things like survivorship benefits. That's a big one. Pre-retirement benefits, post-retirement benefits, cost of living adjustments, all of those things need to be addressed when you're dealing with plans like a pension. 401k is not so much, but it really comes down to the separate order is needed based on the protections that the employees have to protect their retirement assets, because in most instances outside of divorce, retirement is a protected asset, right? So they need the separate order to create that division.
So Jamie, I think you wrote, if I'm not mistaken, not a qualified retirement account. So in other words, 401k, so Quadro is not necessary. Can you tell us what you meant by that?
That was in relation. Crystal had asked a question about the restricted stock options, like RSUs, stock options, ISOs,
Correct.
and that type of stuff. It's not an ERISA plan, so to speak, which is so it's not Quadro is not necessary for those types of plans.
Correct.
Stacy replied back about they obviously there's a premarital, marital, and postmarital asset, but Quadro's not necessary for that type of plan.
Executive comp plans are a completely different ball of wax.
Right. And these restricted stock units have to be divided according to, so there's a couple of things about restricted stock units. One is whether they're vested or they're not vested at the time of the commencement of the action. You must know that, obviously. And then the question is, are they for past performance or for future performance? And then Stacy, I'm going to actually ask you to explain one of my most favorite areas, which is the De-Jesus formula. Since you're on with us, if you don't mind doing that, what that formula stands for and why it's so important as to restricted stock units.
Yes, actually, we were just talking about this for a client, and it can be used for restricted stock, it can be used for stock options, it can also be used for something that's called carry interest, which is a form of income for someone that is a hedge fund manager or private equity manager. And what you're doing is your goal is to try and determine what portion of these investments or income is considered marital and what is considered separate property, so that you can then make a good decision with your lawyer about how they should be divided. And what you're looking at essentially is we're just going to talk about, let's say, non-qualified stock, restricted stock units. Let's do that. So actually, let's do stock options. Sorry. So when were the stock options actually granted? And when do they vest? And when I say the word vest, what that means is when is the date that the person can walk away from that company and take those options with them. And if that vesting date is very far into the future, let's say maybe 5 years, it's not really fair for the spouse that's the non-employee spouse to get 100% of that, right? So what this calculation does is that it really looks at the time from the grant, so when they were granted, to the date of when they vested, creates a calculation, a percentage, and that's what's used to say, okay, based on that, this percentage is marital, this percentage then is separate property.
And part of what your attorney will do during your divorce action is they will figure out what the award documents and what the grant documents that are provided by the company in which your spouse works or where you work actually say. So this formula is used when there is an incentive for people to stay. Sometimes people are given these restricted stock units or stock options actually because they already performed the work. And so even though they vest very far in the future, they're already a bonus essentially that somebody received for performing the work. And therefore they may actually be 100% marital, and they may be divided on, you know, a 50-50 basis or some other basis, depending upon the state. So it's a lot of very technical information that needs to be looked at and a lot of documentation. And you need to make sure that your attorney actually looks at that documentation. So
and I'm just going to jump in here, Lisa, because
Sure.
I put in the chat an article you have written. I just gave everyone the link that beautifully lays out De Jesus how it's used and the types of assets that this can be used for. So everyone feel free to, I wouldn't read it right now, but put it to the side for some reading after our session tonight.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Sarah, when we don't have the information, when the client doesn't have it, and when the other spouse won't turn it over, what steps do we take to get the information?
Well, first, what we like to do is get an idea from the client of what we're looking for. So if, let's say, if you know that every year for the past 10 years you've rented a summer house in the Hamptons, but suddenly the other side is completely ignorant of this. And so what summer house? We've never had a summer house. So we want whatever you have that would maybe show that. So if you have a copy of a lease or something like that from last year, or if you have any kind of documents regarding the expenses, communications with the spouse about these expenses, that would be really helpful. But if we don't have that, or sometimes even if we do, a lot of times we end up subpoenaing banks or employers. So if the other side is just not forthright in terms of what accounts they have, but if you know that they have accounts at A, B, and C bank, we can send subpoenas to those banks and they will turn over records for all of the accounts in the spouse's name or in your name, joint names, all of that. Just like with employers, if the other side is not forthright in terms of turning over W-2s, pay stubs, documents regarding, our restricted stocks or anything like that, we can subpoena the employer and get those documents directly from the employer. And we just want to be careful about that because we don't want to, negatively affect their employment. We want to make sure that it's not going to get them fired or anything like that. So that usually is a last step. It's a last resort. It's not the first thing we try to do. But a lot of times we do end up having to do that because they are just not willing to provide the documents on their own.
And what I would say is before you do that, and thank you, Sarah, because that was such an important statement that you made at the end, before you subpoena somebody's employer, I think you really need to have tried every single avenue, and then you probably need a judge to bless it. Because you do not want to go down the road where your spouse comes in and says, I was fired because you sent the subpoena, or I didn't get my bonus because everybody found out about my divorce. But for sure, if discovery is not turned over, then what is likely to happen is a judge is going to bless the subpoena and likely actually put their own signature on the subpoena and give it actually even more credence than when we send it without that. So it's really important to deal with. Somebody asked about wasteful dissipation of assets, and Dawn, I'm going to ask you, even though you're a non-lawyer, I'm going to ask you what that meant to you in terms of wasteful dissipation.
Yeah, that was part of the reason why things took so long in our case. In my case, there was money that was put in escrow. That was basically the only assets that I had. And so of course the other side claimed that, we should divide them in half. And our contention was that we should not, because there had been wasteful dissipation during the marriage. And Lisa was very kind and said, you can either pay us a fortune or you can do this yourself. I spent a lot of time going through all of his credit card statements and my own diaries where I had written down where he said he was going to be one place, but he was another place, etc., and documenting years worth of trips, gifts, hotel rooms, etc., where it became clear that money had been spent on other companions besides myself during the marriage. And we documented that, and I got back like a huge sum of money. And that made all the difference in setting my life up afterwards. So, it can be an important process.
And just for everybody, so what a wasteful dissipation of assets is when your spouse has spent money on, I would say, drugs, is substance abuse issues, gambling, which is a huge area, other companions, trips, gifts, dining out, hotels, the whole thing. And usually there'll be some credit cards, and this is where Sarah comes in and she does her subpoena power here, and she gets those credit cards turned over, and there's usually 1 or 2 credit cards that somebody has in their name that you haven't seen, and have been kept very secret from you. And we often get those credit cards, and that's where the depositions also take place, where we're asking about that and whether those items were even included on the net worth statement. So Jamie, when you're working with a client through a divorce, what are some of the most important questions that you think people actually are asking you that need to be answered?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. There's a lot of really good questions. I think the biggest question that comes up, and this much kind of goes to the emotional side of things, the question is, am I going to be okay? Right. And people ask that. 99% of the clients that we work with are women. So I'll just say most of the women that I work with ask that question. And that's part of our job. And Jay and I do similar work in our respective businesses. And I think that's really what we're trying to answer is like, let's get the information, let's get it organized, let's help you navigate some of the financial decisions that you're going to have to make in the here and now, but also try to figure out ways where, leveraging, the information on the net worth statement and so on, and all the financial information you've given us to help answer the question, like, what does your life look like 1, 3, 5, and 10 years from now? Right. Because I don't want to speak for Dawn, but we were kind of talking about this a little bit the other day. And I think one of the things that she was probably most concerned about, if I were to speak for her, is what does my life look like when this thing is all over? And how do we put ourselves on how do I put myself on a nice firm financial footing to be able to achieve the goals and my hopes and dreams when all this is said and done? And that's kind of, that's going back to what Judy mentioned about me as a person and why I do the work that I do. That's what gets me fired up about this job, is helping people answer that question. And it sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes the results of the divorce put people in a really bad spot, but that's where the certified financial planner aspect of my life comes in, and helping people try to figure out what the future holds. So I think that's probably the most important question people ask.
So somebody has asked a very interesting question here, which is, as I understand it, that their IRA is actually consists of a real estate investment, and that the IRA is holding the real estate investment, and I am assuming that the IRA is getting the distributions for the real estate investment, and that when the real estate investment is actually sold, that the monies would go back into the IRA, and that it's essentially, instead of putting it into stock or into other vehicles, that it's put into real estate, which is, while it's unique, it's not wrong, and it could actually be a very lucrative way to invest your IRA. And I would think, and this is like off the top of my head, so you'd have to see if this is doable, but if it's a limited partnership, meaning that there's a small amount of this investment that your partner owns, then perhaps what could happen is the IRA is somehow divided, and the distributions from the limited partnership will go into both IRAs in some way. So in other words, they would be split by the IRA, and maybe your IRA and your spouse's IRA would get half. You'd have to go back to probably the general partner for the real estate investment and see if this can be done, and maybe work with somebody like Stacy, Jay, or Jamie, and see if this can be done. But it is definitely not so unusual. And a lot of people who are heavily invested in real estate use their IRAs in that manner, as opposed to putting it into the stock market. So there is probably a way to do that. So moving back actually to Jay. So Jay, what are the things that people should do before they get to the end of their divorce, before they write that agreement about those retirement accounts? What should they be doing? Because I know that you have been very helpful giving us retirement language, for example, and making sure that we're drafting the agreement correctly with regard to retirement accounts, so that when you get to do those quadros, that actually it works out okay, because it doesn't always happen that way.
Well, I think that before you get to the settlement agreement, Jamie touched on this. Part of our role as a financial planner is to help people plan for their lives financially. One of the, I guess, the hardest part about divorce is the world that you knew is no longer going to be the same. So the day you thought you were going to retire, where your children were going to go to college, the home you were going to live in, all of these things may or may not have to change. But the only way we can determine that is by looking at what your needs are and what the means are to achieve them. So, I always try to have my clients give me your goals, what you would like to do. Let's see what you have, and then let's see if we can meet those goals. And, with any goal, you either modify the goal or modify what you do to reach the goal. And so when you're working towards settlement, I think it's important to understand what you need out of the marriage in order to help you to achieve the goal. So, there may be things that you have in the marriage that may be conducive to helping you achieve your goal, and other things that may not necessarily help you achieve your goal. But I think it's really about giving you peace of mind. And, I always tell clients, anxiety is about worrying about the future. I try to help my clients live with intention and reduce that anxiety by letting them know exactly what their future will look like based upon the situation, and what it may look like after divorce based upon what the assets are of the marriage and what equitable division would look like. So I think that before getting to settlement, it's important to sit down and think about all the things about life after divorce, because you will thrive and you will survive. You will, be able to achieve all the great things you want to achieve. We just have to determine what those are and figure out a way to make it work for you.
That's great, Jay. And Stacy, thank you for explaining that carry forward losses are also it could be an asset that can be divided. You have to be very conscious, and your attorney should be, and that's why it's great to work with a financial professional as well, to point out that these items exist and that they should be considered assets, because they probably will not exist on the net worth statement. You've got to dig. I always say this, another place to look for missing assets is actually on the tax returns, because a lot of times people prepay their taxes and they're hoping that those taxes come back to them after the divorce is over. And so there is a line on the tax return that will have as overpayment of taxes. Make sure that that is looked at and captured as well. So Dawn, I'm going to ask you, when you go through, can you explain first of all what a deposition is and how the best way to deal in a deposition is?
Well, I'm not sure if I can do the best job technically explaining.
Not technically, but why don't you do it as having experienced it?
Okay, well, I mean, there came a point where I was in a room with you, and my now ex-husband was in a room with his lawyer, and for example, the main thing I remember going over is the wasteful dissipation aspect of what we were discussing, right? So we had all of what we considered our proof, and we went through it, pretty much. I mean, I was under oath, right? Line by line. And there was a kind of wonderful moment, because you're under oath, right? Where my now ex-husband denied, and finally cracked. And his lawyer said, "You're an idiot." And Lisa stood up and said, "We can go." So, there is the power of facts. You can prevail. It was one of the great moments of my life. However, it was extremely ugly, because you have somebody on the other side who's equally invested in revealing your flaws. I mean, I got to see myself in a way that I hope I never have to again. And, because I have been educated financially, this is a gift that keeps on giving. I still go through, I use my net worth statement now still to understand how the money is disappearing, where it's going. And also I've learned how to have the tough conversations. I have to have a conversation with my son who's not behaving well about money. And I would not be having this conversation, but I will never be the person I was who was sitting in that deposition room and, insulted, frankly, the way, I mean, depositions are not fun. You look at like a deposition on TV and you always think you're going to come out on the right side. You have to go in there with all your evidence in order.
And I think the key to a deposition is, you're right, it's not fun. And the idea is that somebody's going to pick up on all of your pressure points, and they're going to work those pressure points for, 5 or 6 or 7 hours. And so, but it's doable, right? It was doable. You got through it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the point. And you're not there to prove your case or to speak too much. You're there to answer the questions that are asked. Nothing more, nothing less. That it's not a place to tell your story. And I think people tend to forget that, which is where somebody says you're an idiot and walks out, right? Because that is the key, is to answer just the questions. So somebody asked if a couple married under 10 years never established any joint account and kept everything separate, meaning cars, titles separately, no checking, taxes were filed separately, everything was separate. I guess whether that would, whether that constitutes marital property. And now the husband is claiming that the wife owes him for half the rent. The husband paid the rent on the lease in his name. I don't think the husband is getting back the rent for the last 10 years. I don't think that's happening. I think the bigger question to all of that is whether or not this was truly an economic partnership, and how the court actually will divide, how the court would divide the assets based upon that. Because everything was kept so separate. And I don't know if in that particular case there were children or not. That makes a difference. All of these kinds of things make a difference. So who was earning the money, any of that. So each case is very fact specific. And I think you have to work with your lawyer to develop that strategy of what to do in terms of that. So that's where we are in terms of that. I want to talk for a minute about Social Security, because it's a great topic and people ask me all the time. So Jay, I'm going to ask you, for Social Security, can you explain, first of all, how many years you have to be married to be able to collect your spouse's Social Security?
You need to be married at least 10 years.
Okay. And when you collect your spouse's, you have a couple of different choices in terms of collecting Social Security. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, the key rule is that you cannot get remarried and you have to be at least 62.
Okay, and you can then, if you wait until 65, 67, 70, what benefits are there?
So the one thing about collecting a spouse's Social Security is you're collecting 50% of their payment. But if you elect to start taking it at 62, you forever condemned yourself to a lower payment. It's just like taking your Social Security early. So you would either get your Social Security or half of your spouse's Social Security, whichever is greater. You won't get both. So you have to determine if it makes sense. But you will be reduced forevermore if you start at 62. The benefit to waiting is that you won't have any reduction in the benefit if you wait to your full retirement age, whatever that may be. I think most people on this call is close to 67, if not 67. But that's generally how it would work. And if you have
Okay.
a disabled, if you're taking care of a disabled child, there are different rules. It gets in the weeds. So every case is specific, but generally speaking, those are the rules.
And I'll give one more helpful hint, because it actually has come up in several cases, is that if you and your spouse have an age difference, your spouse may be much older, perhaps, or you, and there's a younger child, there are rules for Social Security for collecting, actually, where the child is 18 years of age. You might be able to actually get Social Security for that particular child. So for example, if you are already collecting Social Security and you're in your 60s and the child is under 18, or your spouse is in his 60s and your child is under 18, there may be Social Security benefits to that. So everybody should go to the Social Security site and look at what the rules are, because I will tell you, very often people do not collect as much as they could be collecting, and they give up certain rights, and that's unfortunate, because that's just money that is just being literally given away. So it's really important to actually look at the Social Security. The other thing is to remember that I would say it's one of the bonuses of divorce, and Jay mentioned it, but it's worth repeating. So you can collect your own, and you should collect your own if your own is more than half of your spouse's, okay? But your spouse will still, if you're collecting half of your spouse's Social Security, your spouse will still get 100% of their Social Security. So it's almost like a 1.5, which is a bonus for people going through divorce. I'm not sure why they keep that going, and why we're all paying for that, but there is 1.5 being collected, actually, by many people who have gone through a divorce. So it's not that your spouse will lose half their Social Security. They will get their full Social Security, and you will be able to collect half of that total Social Security. So it's kind of interesting.
And they won't even know about it.
Right.
All you need is the spouse. All you need is the Social Security number, and go to the Social Security Administration. Your former spouse won't even know you're collecting it.
So it's actually it's really like a gift almost for going through your divorce. Stacy, are there questions that we need to go through before I continue?
I think we're good with questions. I would just jump in and say there's a lot of great information on the Savvy Ladies website on Social Security. We also have not only blogs, and I put one in the chat, but we also have Mary Beth Franklin, who is one of the top Social Security experts in the country, who was someone that we had a fantastic webinar with. So go on the website for Savvy Ladies. You're going to find some great information. And also, just word to the wise, the Social Security office, when you get the information about the best claim strategy, make sure you call back at least once to a different person, ask the same question, make sure you're getting the same information. Not everybody is as knowledgeable about complicated Social Security situations at the Social Security office as we would like. So that's just kind of a word to wise. We've definitely had people get very different advice, and just, make sure you're protecting yourself.
And then there's a question, how far back can you usually get credit card and bank statements in a subpoena? And that's a really important question. So Sarah, you know the answer to this. How many years can we go back usually?
I believe it's generally 7 years.
Yeah.
And some banks will have more, and some banks try to claim that they have less, and then you kind of have to push back a little bit.
So Sarah is our one of the people in our office who actually are doing that pushback for those statements, because they don't want to always produce them, and a lot of times it takes a lot of calling from our paralegals to actually get those statements from subpoenas, from banks, etc. Another thing I'm going to say is, for people who have spouses who are in businesses, or I see that, what if he owns his own business? I will tell you another helpful hint is to make sure that you get financial statements from any of the banks where there have been loans given to that person, because there may be income information on those financial statements for loans that may not be as readily available in anything else that you find. And so people always want to show their best financial situation, or usually want to show their best financial situation when they're actually applying for a loan, whether it be for a home mortgage or a loan for a business or credit line, etc. And so they actually may put their true income or even exaggerate their income on those statements, those financial statements, as well as their assets. And those are what we call admissions against their interest. And they can be used, if they're certified correctly, they can be used actually in trials or in depositions. Sarah, I'm going to ask you one other question, which is, when we get those subpoena documents, we ask for certifications. Can you explain what that is?
So a certification is a document that is signed and notarized. It's by someone at the bank, the person providing the records, and it's them swearing that these records are accurate and true copies of their records, and that they were made, all of the transactions were recorded at the time when they occurred. And the purpose is so that we can use them in depositions, in trials, and overcome a hearsay objection, because we want to make sure that the documents that we're using are accurate and are going to be admissible in terms of the rules of evidence. Otherwise, if it's just statements from, a person from the other party, we don't know what they've done to the statements. Have they doctored them? Are things missing, pages missing? So that's why when we get them directly from the bank, we need that certification so that they can be used. And if we don't have that certification, which a lot of banks don't like to do, then we have to come out with the threat of, well, if you don't want to give us a certification, then we're going to need someone from the bank to come to court and testify. And then that, we usually get the certification quickly after that.
Good job, Sarah. So now I know why we get those certifications. Any other questions? It's past 7, a little bit past 7 o'clock, and we are scheduled to end, but we have another session next week, another panel discussion, which will actually talk about, well, we have people who are talking about what you do in your future. And we have Maggie Paddock, who is coming, and who is a financial advisor, and Melina Debenheim, who is actually a coach, a divorce coach. So she will be with us. And then, as Judy noted, or Stacy did, the following week after that, the week before Valentine's Day, we have a trust and estates attorney, Amy Holzman, who's fabulous. And we have Julia Rogers, who is from Hello Prenup, which I will tell you, and she's also a divorce attorney, who actually developed a whole program for prenups, and why prenups and postnups could be actually very helpful and important. So I thank everyone for coming.
And Lisa, I'm going to wrap it up with one last question that I saw in the chat, where someone asked, should a CDFA, each person have their own financial advisor CDFA, or should it be a neutral? And I thought that was a really interesting question. If you guys, I'll open it up to the panel, but if you want to answer that.
So, okay, so my view is that you need your own CDFA. Okay, I know that in mediation, sometimes people use one CDFA. It is my belief that you should have your own CDFA, your own attorney, your own people, your own team, and that is who you collaborate with, because you are not going through a divorce with somebody who you are, there's a reason you're in a divorce. There's a reason why you actually are parting ways. And there may be many reasons, but you need to have your own team that you can trust and who is going to be working and advocating for you. So Jay, you might have a different view. Jamie, you might have a different view, but that's my view.
I think, go ahead, Jamie.
No, you had answered the question in the chat there, and I mean, we can be used in many ways, right? Financial neutral, financial advocate, whatever. But I would concur with what Lisa said. I'm all about, I'm a big fan of creating Team U, right? Have your financial planner, your CDFA, your tax person, your attorney, all these people working hand in hand to help get you through this. And out the other side. So I would concur with exactly what Lisa said. I've done some financial neutral work in the past, and you get about 3/4 of the way through it, and it starts to turn into a bit of a disaster, because when one side starts hearing that information that they don't like, it can start to spiral, and then you don't get anywhere with it, and you're just wasting money. So
Lisa said
I
to
think
me,
what's that, Don?
Lisa said to me early on, there is no hour anymore. Get that through your head.
Yeah. You are now the CEO of your new life, and you need to start acting like it, right? Like be very pragmatic, start acting like the CEO of your life, and start focusing on the future, right? And it was great advice that she gave you, for sure.
The hardest part I find when I'm in a neutral situation, because in our profession, we're trained to help educate our clients on making good financial decisions. And when we're working as a neutral, we really can't give that advice. We can just basically state the facts, and we have to be neutral to both parties. So we can't say this account will benefit you this way in retirement because of these reasons, or this type of stock in your portfolio is not going to benefit you because of your risk and it's going to cause taxes. So it's the peeling the onion back. We're really limited to how far we can peel the onion back and provide advice. And I think for me, working as a neutral, that's one of the hardest things to be limited, to not be able to help a client when they have a question and give them specific advice.
Well, thank you. I think that's really great information for everyone to have. So I think that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you, Lisa, for moderating a great panel.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I hope that it was helpful to everybody.
I'm just going to chime in with one more resource for all of you. If you have additional questions, please go to the Savvy Ladies website. We have a helpline and over 300 volunteers. Many of them do have unique expertise, like our fabulous speakers that we have here today, about divorce. So you may have lingering questions, or you may have questions that come up. So go right to Savvy Ladies. You'll see right on our homepage. The helpline is life-saving. It's free. So please do use it. And thank you for sharing your screen there, Judy. Again, please use it. And it's very easy. And you can even put it as an app on your phone. I don't know if you can see this, but I've got my Savvy Ladies app right there. And yes, don't judge me. My son put a hot dog for some reason flying through space as my screensaver. That just tells you enough about my family life. The good news, he's going off to college next year. So thank you again.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jay,
Thank you all
for
so much.
sponsoring. Thank you. Thanks, Dawn. Thanks, Jamie. And thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Hi, I joined a little later, and I see some